Ever wonder how to bring fantasy characters to life with your art? In today's journey, I will show you my process for creating an elf ninja girl from scratch to final render. This drawing itself took me like the whole thing from sketch to render, it takes me like 10 hours. And like always, you start out with simple shapes. I know people don't like to hear it. You have to be able to draw shapes and rotate them. All right. That's the only way you're going to be able to draw your own characters. And so I draw my mannequin, soft erase it. Then what you want to do is you start building it. I draw the eyes first because it kind of like starts giving it personality. Originally, what I wanted to do with this drawing was you can see I'm thinking about giving like a baggy top, and I was kind of going more towards like the ninja theme. But what I also wanted to do was give her like a tactical vest, and that baggy top was just not making sense with the tactical vest at all. So I end up making it more of like a shirt. I still wanted to keep the really long sleeve towards the arm because that makes her feel more elegant. So I left that, but what I ended up doing is just, around her waist is just so tight and it's just tight all over. And then you have this really baggy shirt and it didn't make sense to me. So I changed it. I have to redraw this hand several times. And if you look closely at the videos, I have a tutorial that walks you through the steps of drawing a hand. Hands are not easy, okay? And even though I have a procedure that I use to draw hands, I still have to do it like over and over. And I'm hoping that at least people will see that in this drawing, I'm not just doing everything instantly. I'm making mistakes. But the important thing is you keep working at it till you get something that you like. I'm drawing this finger pointing and it still feels weird. And I finally get this idea because I was like, she outside of the mask, it doesn't really feel like a ninja. Maybe I should give her like a weapon, sword or a dagger or something. Because right now she just looks like this elf girl who is in the middle of COVID, to be honest. You know what? So starting out, I had a plan. And my plan was I wanted a ninja, I wanted a girl, and I wanted her to have purple eyes. That was my original plan. And so I started working through it, and I was like, oh, a tactical vest, that would be cool. So here you go. Here I am. I'm drawing this hand. It's not coming out. I'm struggling with perspective a lot. I think I redraw this dagger a billion times too. The best advice I can give is whenever you're like really struggling, is definitely try to find a reference. With hands, it's the easiest thing to do is either A, take a picture of yourself doing the hand pose, or have a friend or someone you're close to do the pose and take a picture of them. And if you can get the exact perspective that you're trying to draw, it would make it so much easier. That's not always ideal when taking the picture. But I literally got a picture of a hand for this drawing, and I was like, okay, I'm so tired of drawing this hand right now. I'm going to get it right. I ended up going with the idea of a tanto, something along those lines. That's just Japanese short sword. And even with the reference, I'm indecisive on how I want this hand to be. But so she's got her tactical vest, she's got tactical pants, she's not wearing a belt. She's got a knife, she's got clothes under her, she's got a shirt under her vest. I wanted to give her kind of like a ponytail thing. I thought that would be something that a ninja would more likely have their hair in. And originally I wasn't even thinking about an elf, but I put the elf ear in there and I thought it looked good. So now I have an elf. And right now, I'm just thinking about lighting. I'm doing very light hatching just to kind of get an idea of where the dark parts can be. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to color this. So it doesn't like I'm not going to try to make the drawing too perfect. I just want to have the shading make sense to me where I can shade it real quickly. So you see, I hatch out the arm in the background. I play around with like the stomach area. I realized that there would be a shadow on her chest from the dagger. A lot of people don't realize this, but especially for me, like I'm not really thinking about lighting at all until I get to the end when I'm lighting the character. I'm thinking about structure, sure, but once I have my 3D shapes in, then I think about lighting. Like there's the steps. I do my guidelines, I drew my sketch, I cleaned up the sketch, then I drew some lighting. Now look, I soft raised it, and that's what I'm doing. Now I'm refining the whole thing. This is where I'm drawing my actual line art. And this part tends to take a lot of time for me because I want it to be clean. And you'll notice that I undo a lot because I don't like the line. Again, I'm not hitting the lines perfectly every time. Especially whenever I'm doing line art, I tend to like do the eyes first. Because the eyes, they're the windows to the soul. They're what makes everything better. This entire part right now is just drawing lines. I'm drawing darker lines on the eyes so I'm drawing darker lines on the iris. That's mostly because the upper eyelid casts a shadow on the eye. So if you draw a bunch of lines closer together at the top and then you kind of start making the gap wider, it changes. Like it change is not the word I'm looking for. It makes it feel like it's a shadow. So you want the bottom of the part of the eye to be lighter to make the eye look more realistic. She's a ninja, so my thought process is I want her to have some pointy hair so she feels a little dangerous. So she's got spiky hair, then she's got the ponytail. And if you're struggling getting smooth lines, I did this in Procreate. You can go to either the settings or go to the brush settings. If you go to the global settings, you can go to pressure and change the stabilization. It changes it for every single brush, which is sometimes good, sometimes not. Brushes I specially designed myself, and I made the stability changes on those brushes. But for line art, I highly recommend having streamline at least 9%. A lot of people have told me they increase it all the way up to like 30%. I feel like that's a little excessive because I lose control of my lines. Like I don't feel like I'm drawing anymore. It's just this weird loopy thing. But you definitely want your streamline up if you're drawing in Procreate. Most like any software, when it comes to line art, whatever you're inking with, you are going to want to increase the stabilization just so you can get cleaner lines. Right now, I'm drawing really thick line on the chest because I want it to feel like it has weight to it. And it's one thing that I'm constantly doing that may not be completely obvious. I will draw thicker lines towards the bottom on her sleeve right here. The hand that's holding the dagger in that big sleeve, you can tell that the bottom part is a lot thicker than the top part of the sleeve. What that does is it helps convey shadow more, and it also makes it look more interesting. If you use one line width for the whole thing, it doesn't matter how good you draw it, it's just gonna feel boring. I've done this before where you draw everything in one tone, like one line width, and then you go back later and you add line weight if you need to do that. Go right ahead. I'm still doing the line weight. I'm still doing the line art. I'm almost done. Now, what I do with this one, I do my silhouette. I tend to do it in like not 50% gray. The background, you want to be 50% gray. That way your colors don't get biased or skewed in one direction. So colors are relative. All right. If you have a really light color surrounded by a lot of dark colors, that light color is going to feel super bright. As vice versa, if you have a dark color surrounded by light colors, it's going to feel really dark. So if you paint on a white canvas, you're going to find yourself using darker colors to compensate for that. Or if you have a black background, you're going to find yourself using really bright colors. So the way I combat this is I make the background at 50% gray, and that helps keep the colors neutral and more pure to what they would actually be. And so I make a silhouette. I make it pretty bright. I'm thinking I use the silhouette to kind of test it out. Like, this is how bright I want the lighting to be. And I usually kind of stick to it, especially for like the skin. And then what you want to do is a clipping mask on top of your silhouette layer. And once that's done, I'll make another layer on top of the silhouette layer and I'll name it skin. And with the skin layer clipped to the silhouette layer, I can't paint outside the silhouette. So it just makes it a little bit easier to paint within the lines. I start with skin because just like with drawing the eyes, it makes the character start coming alive, in my opinion. Up until that, it just feels it's either like this flat statue looking thing. So once you start adding skin, it becomes more believable. It really doesn't matter what you do first. I'm doing the flats. That's this part of this process is I do the flats in the color I want. So I gave her the purple eyes because I already knew what color I wanted them to be. And then like, well, black hair, it's a little cliche, but black hair with purple eyes goes really well. And this is a ninja, so I'm going to want to use muted colors. I don't want to use anything bright and fancy because in my mind, a ninja is going to try to be sneaking around, so they don't want to be noticed. But I don't want to put her in all black because that will be boring. So I ended up giving her black hair. When you're coloring your flats, you want to have a brush that the pressure sensitivity will affect the size of the brush, but not affect the pressure of the like softness or hardness. Like you don't want to be able to draw really lightly. You want it to be just one consistent tone all the way across. So you can modify a brush. You can use any brush that does that. I made my own brush. I will have available soon for purchase if people are interested in that. So I block in. So you can see I'm using really muted colors. I run into this issue where it's like, okay, it's actually kind of boring because it's so samey. Like there's just so much gray and black. So I threw in this red shirt. I was like, well, that would give this a huge contrast if I have a red shirt. And I'm going to leave it in here for a little while, but later on, I decide that the red shirt doesn't make sense for this character and it's actually kind of clashing. My main focal point I want is to be the purple eyes. And by making the shirt red, the red color I have, the shirt is now the focal point because it's surrounded by all these really muted gray colors. And, I don't really know what I'm going to make the handle of the sword. I'm kind of making it brown, but I make it way too bright and saturated. I need to change that. So now that I've finished all my flats, above the flats, I make a new layer and I call it Shadow 1. I change the opacity to 81%. I put the blending mode to multiply, and then I choose a color kind of like in the mid upper range. I chose like a brownish color. The multiply mode will change the way the color looks from when I'm color picking it. You'll notice all those little paint things in the top. I like to set up a layer called colors at the very top, and I'll just use that as my palette. And it also helps you see what colors I'm picking better. So it kind of works both ways. And so since I already have my shadows kind of set up when I did my hatching for in a sketch phase, I'm pretty confident where the shadows go. In shadow one layer, all I'm doing is I'm separating dark and light. So anywhere there is shadow, there's I put a shadow, like I paint there. Anywhere that the light is hitting, I don't paint there. I'm not concerned about how dark the shadow is or how light it is. Everything is just one thing, shadow, one color. I'm still using my brush that I use to flat the colors in. I'm trying to keep it consistent. And when I do anime, I really don't do much blending at all because my main goal is to make it look like it's on the TV screen. And due to like processing time, they tend to not blend very much. But there's nothing keeping you from blending. If I was gonna blend, I'd probably like still do it with like a hard edge, and then I'd blend it afterwards. I like doing everything in steps. It makes it easier if it's like, okay, I'll think about the shadow one now. Once I have all the shadows where I want them, then I'll think about blending and smoothing soft edges. And see, I even start like messing with the color of the eyes because I want them to be the focal point. I know I want them to be purple, but they're not the that's not the first thing you see. So I finally come up with this idea and it's like, well, what if I have this really pink makeup around the eyes with eyeshadow, and that like really draws your attention to the eyes, and I like it a lot. And you see I changed the color of the shirt to more whitish color. So now everything like your main focus is the eyes because it's the most color going on right here. So you got a shadow one layer, shadow two is where I make a new layer above shadow one. And again, I set it to multiply opacity 81%. Take your shadow one color and you just make it slightly darker, a third of the way down if you're using the standard coloring box. For this, I paint the darker shadows, like cast shadows, for example. And then shadow three, I'll do occlusion shadows, and that's basically all that is where the light can't reach. So they're even closer to like as black as the shadow is going to get. You're pretty much done at this point. What I want to tell you about here is what I did is I created a layer above everything and I make it an overlay layer. I set the opacity to like 13%. And you can pretty much I take the most saturated colors I can think of and I just fill the entire layer and I see how it affects my character. And that is how you harmonize all your colors, and it just really brings it out and makes it look nice. I also should mention that I do highlights on their own layer. The blending mode I'll use for that is either add, overlay, or hard light, depending on just how well I feel like it looks for the character. The main highlights are usually in the hair. So yeah, this isn't really a deep dive tutorial, but this is my basic thought process. Let me know in the comments what type of videos you'd like to see in the future.